The golden sun crests the horizon, bleeding light across the flat, dusty expanse of the Euphrates Valley. Below, the river snakes through the silt, a lifeline in a landscape defined by heat and endurance. For centuries, this was merely a place where water met earth, a modest cluster of huts where survival was the only ambition. But the geography held a secret. Here, the Tigris and the Euphrates draw closer than anywhere else, creating a natural funnel. Traders arrived with grain and left with copper. They brought news from the mountains and carried away the secrets of the plains. Slowly, the mud brick foundations thickened. The narrow paths widened into thoroughfares. The air here vibrated with the sound of chisels against stone and the rhythmic pulse of a growing market. As the shadows stretched long across the baked earth, the city stood poised at the edge of history, a beacon of potential. In 1792 BC, the era of small-scale survival ended. Hammurabi ascended the throne, and the city felt the change in the rhythm of its streets. He did not look at the horizon as a barrier, but as a map of potential. He mobilized his forces, moving across the plains with a singular purpose. Where once there were isolated city-states, each guarding its own narrow interests, there was now a single, tightening grip. He marched from the northern hills to the southern marshes, dismantling the old borders and forcing disparate leaders to yield. The dust kicked up by his advancing columns signaled the end of fragmentation. He replaced local loyalties with a centralized command, binding the disparate settlements into a unified, cohesive power. The rivers, once merely conduits for trade, now served as the arteries of an expanding empire. Hammurabi did not just occupy territory, he integrated it. He established garrisons, stationed administrators, and ensured that the reach of his authority touched every corner. The momentum was relentless. By the time his armies returned, Babylon was the capital of a kingdom unified by the iron will of a single ruler. Hammurabi understood that an empire built on the sword would eventually rust. He sought a foundation that could outlast his own life. He commissioned a massive block of black basalt, a stone as dark and enduring as the earth itself. Scribes worked for weeks, their chisels biting into the hard surface to carve 282 distinct laws. Every stroke of the cuneiform script was precise, deliberate, and final. This was not a collection of private decrees hidden away in the shadows of a throne room. When the monument was finished, it was hauled into the heart of the city and erected in the public square. For the first time, the rules governing life were not subject to the whim of a local governor or the mood of a judge. They were etched in stone, visible to anyone who could stand before them. A merchant could point to the law during a trade dispute. A victim could cite the text to demand restitution. The act of placing the steel in the light transformed the city. Justice became a physical presence in the streets, a standard that held the powerful and the commoner to the same measure. The empire was bound by a shared, written reality. While the laws governed the earth, the scribes turned their gaze upward to claim the sky. Inside the quiet chambers of the city, they hunched over damp clay tablets, their styluses moving in rhythmic, practiced patterns. They did not merely watch the stars, they captured them. To manage the complexity of the heavens, they developed a base, 6-0 number system, a mathematical framework that divided the circle and the hour into precise, manageable segments. This was a radical act of intellectual architecture. They tracked the movement of the moon across the dark expanse, recording every shift in position against the horizon. Night after night, they filled rows of tablets with data, building a library of celestial cycles that spanned generations. When they announced that the sun would vanish at a specific hour, the city listened. They watched the sky, and when the shadow began to bite into the light, the prediction held true. It was a triumph of logic over superstition. By mapping the heavens, they transformed the chaotic night into a predictable clock. The ambition that mapped the stars soon demanded a physical form that could touch them. Across the city, the skyline began to climb. Brick by brick, laborers hauled sun-dried mud into the heat, stacking massive tiers that rose toward the clouds. These were the ziggurats, colossal stairways designed to bridge the gap between the dust of the earth and the domain of the divine. The temple to Marduk stood at the center, a mountain of masonry that dwarfed the surrounding homes and workshops. From the base, the structure seemed to pull the very horizon upward. Priests climbed the steep, narrow stairs, their shadows stretching long. Below, the city bustled in the cooling shade of these towering monuments. The air in the streets was thick with the scent of baked clay and incense. Every angle of the architecture was calculated to project power, a testament to a civilization that refused to remain grounded. As the sun hit the upper reaches of the temples, the entire city seemed to glow. The ziggurats stood as silent, stone witnesses. The height of the ziggurats could not shield the city from the turning of the tide. In 1595 BC, the horizon shifted. The Hittite army emerged from the dust, a wall of iron and momentum that the city gates were never built to withstand. The impact was immediate. Battering rams shattered the mud brick defenses, and the sound of trade and prayer was replaced by the roar of fire. Stone walls that had stood for generations buckled under the assault. The temples of Marduk, once reaching for the clouds, were torn down, their foundations cracked by the weight of the siege. Smoke choked the streets, turning the bright desert sun into a dim orange haze. By the time the dust settled, the sprawling metropolis was a graveyard of broken pottery and collapsed timber. The scribes' tablets lay shattered in the dirt, their records of stars and laws buried beneath the rubble. Silence reclaimed the plains. Where there had been the rhythmic pulse of a thriving empire, there was now only the wind whistling through jagged, empty window frames. The ruins did not remain silent for long. Centuries after the collapse, Nebuchadnezzar II commanded the earth to rise again. Thousands of laborers returned to the site, clearing the debris of the past to lay the foundation for a new, fortified wonder. The city walls grew thick and high, wide enough for chariots to race across their summits. Then came the color. The Ishtar Gate rose from the desert floor, its surface covered in brilliant, deep blue glazed bricks that caught the sun and shimmered. Lions and dragons, molded in relief, marched across the blue facade. Beyond the gates, the city defied the heat itself. Terrace structures climbed toward the sky, carrying layers of soil and exotic flora. Water moved through complex, hidden channels. The Hanging Gardens stood as a lush, green oasis, a deliberate engineering of nature to serve human will. Every brick laid and every vine planted served as a testament to a power that refused to stay buried. The horizon darkened again, not with storm clouds, but with the dust of a massive, advancing force. In 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus the Great arrived at the perimeter of the city. For days, the defenders watched from the ramparts, as the Persian camp spread across the plains like a sea of leather and iron. The walls were thick enough for chariots, yet the expected thunder of siege engines never came. Instead, the heavy bronze bolts of the Ishtar Gate were drawn back. The massive doors groaned on their stone pivots, swinging wide to reveal the interior streets. There was no clash of steel, no final stand among the ziggurats. Cyrus rode through the threshold, his scouts fanning out to secure the intersections. He did not order the torching of temples or the breaking of tablets. He moved through the city as a ruler, claiming an inheritance. The guards lowered their spears as the Persian procession crossed the city center. This was the final shift. Today, the wind sweeps over the silent, sun-bleached mounds of earth that once held the heart of the world. Where the ziggurats climb toward the clouds, only broken mud bricks remain, half buried in the shifting desert sands. Yet, the reach of this city extends far beyond these crumbling walls. Look at the clock on the wall, or the calendar on the desk. The base 60 system used by the scribes to track the stars 4,000 years ago still dictates the 60 seconds in our minutes and the 60 minutes in our hours. The circle remains divided into 360 degrees because of the mathematical foundations laid in the shadow of the Euphrates. Even the concept of justice, written, public, and consistent, traces its lineage back to the black basalt steel that once stood in the city square. We live in a world built upon the blueprints they drafted in clay. The empire fell, the kings passed into myth, and the gates were reclaimed by the dust. But the intellectual architecture persists. Every time a law is codified or a star is mapped with precision, the spirit of Babylon finds a new voice. These ruins are not merely the grave of an ancient power, they are the bedrock of modern civilization. The echoes of that ambition remain, reminding us that even the greatest empires are built on the enduring, immortal strength of human innovation. The desert wind continues to blow, carrying the memory of a city that dared to measure the heavens and define the rules of the earth.